Welcome to our talk, A Conversation with Your Architecture. How many of you have been to Open Source North before? Excellent.
Woo!
Well, if you haven't been here before, welcome. Yeah, let's go. No, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work? What did you do? Did you break it already?
Oh, hang on. It really is not working.
You would think, after sitting in this room for 40 minutes, but we did test this.
There we go.
Woo-hoo.
I don't know why that, oh, it probably got disconnected.
Well, that's fine, because there's more people still wandering
let's just
in,
go.
so they won't feel left out.
Okay. Quick question for the audience. We want to know what everyone's experience is with diagrams, whether that is an architecture diagram or a class diagram or a sequence diagram or back of the napkin, data flow visual over cocktails. Raise your hand if you use diagrams. Cool.
Okay, it looks like...
What has your experience been? Like, how many people has this been useful for? Raise your hand.
Useful.
And keep your hand raised if it has been challenging. Okay, that's basically everyone. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about today is some of the challenges. Kevin.
Yeah, so welcome. I'm going to say a couple of things about myself. I'm a solutions architect AWS. I wear this nice hoodie just to show how cool I am. I've been doing software development and architecture for 30 years. I'm actually an alumni of UST through the software engineering program. I am a diagram snob, so I really like my diagrams to be perfect, and I'm very funny. I'm humorous. You'll notice there's two asterisks on there. One, opinions are myself. What I'm saying doesn't represent AWS, and my family also doesn't think I'm funny. So,
I'm Jenna. I'm a developer advocate at Pinecone. I started there about 3 months ago. I used to work with Kevin at AWS, which is kind of where this talk originated from. We've been talking about this for about a year now. My background, I've been a full stack developer before it was even trendy and cool and fashionable. I consume a lot of diagrams, so I feel the pain that you probably all feel. I also create a lot of diagrams as part of my job. I have to communicate to developers how something works, how data flows, how the architecture, how a class or a module is put together. I will just say I'm not a designer, so like creating diagrams is really hard for me. I like to have it look nice. You'll notice that throughout this talk because we're using the default Google Slides template. Okay, so you probably all know this, that diagrams are actually pretty hard. We use them to communicate to people. People communicate to us, our stakeholders. We are reading them, analyzing them. We might be generating code from them. We're using them to make decisions, to decide, like, does this, should we do it this way, or did this work in the past? And so today we're going to talk about kind of where we've been and some of the use cases and personas. We're going to talk about where we currently are, especially in regards to what AI can help us with. And then we're going to talk about where we're going. There's going to be some hand raising here. Like we like to do interactive talks. So we're going to play a game. I need a volunteer. Is there anyone that would like to help us? Basically, we're going to show you a diagram. We would love to have you out loud say what that diagram, like describe it, analyze it. Okay.
No volunteers?
Yes,
Don't
we
be
got a volunteer.
Okay. Isaac will volunteer.
Thank you.
Oh, you got
Oh,
it? Sorry, Isaac doesn't win.
Here.
Ben wins,
Oh.
sorry.
Sorry.
Okay.
Ben, sorry.
All right.
There's more opportunities.
That's architecture, something steamed up in
Great
Excellent.
job. All right.
Excellent.
Maybe we need to give Isaac a chance to give us a better version.
the architect.
Oh, all right, here. Why don't you tell us what you would say?
Is that
Just guess. It doesn't.
data flow diagram at a high level?
What is it doing?
Yeah. What did I?
Showing how the user interacts with the system coming in through the gateway to the Lambda. how the flow is going.
All right, not bad. So here's, we also asked Claude 3.5 to analyze this diagram, and it took 9 seconds to do that. We gave it a pretty, oops, go back.
Sorry.
We gave it a pretty simple prompt. We said, you're an expert in AWS services and serverless architecture. Describe the key components and services of the attached diagram. And this was the result. And you can see that, let's go to the next one. It gives us a bunch of info about it. Is it that useful? It still doesn't also know the context. I think the thing that both we saw with Ben and Isaac, it's like, here's a brand new diagram. I have no idea what the context is. I have no idea what kind of app this is. I see some data, read and write. I know there's some data flow, but it's hard to make an assessment on what it really is, and we see the same thing right here. But what's nice is, there's 9 seconds and boom, it at least has a description for you.
So that example where we're asking an LLM a question and it's spitting information out, it's super simple. It just knows the information or the data that it was trained on. But there's actually a lot, so that would cover the first 2 bullet points here, basically, a model, a multimodal model, and user and system prompt. But there's other techniques here that we can be using in order to do some of this analysis. And what I want to kind of show here is that as our task or what we want to accomplish with our diagrams and our analysis and potentially any decisions we want to make, as that gets more sophisticated, so does the technologies or the techniques that we need to do in order to accomplish that. We're gonna very tangentially touch upon some of these things. This is kind of where you can pull out your buzzword bingo card. We'll mention a few things, but we're not gonna dive deep into what RAG is or what vector databases are or anything like that.
What a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
I made this.
And if you want the prompt, it's right here. But before we kind of jump into what some of these use cases are, I just want to point out that we aren't doing this in a vacuum. We're not just writing code and pushing it into production and then wiping our hands of it. We actually have, there's a software development lifecycle, and it's not just maintenance. It includes extending, evolving our architecture, adding more features, fixing bugs, scaling it. Eventually, maybe we need to build the next generation of our product. So we'll look at some of the use cases here. The first one here is about onboarding and understanding. Someone needs to be able, as someone comes to a project or a new team or a new company, they need to understand what is going on in the system or systems that they'll be working in. This is actually something I'm doing right now at Pinecone. I am in a lot of one-on-one meetings. I'm sitting in other larger meetings as a fly on the wall, absorbing as much information as I can. I'm reading a lot of outdated documentation and diagrams. I'm reverse engineering a lot of code, sifting through Git commits to figure out what is happening here? Why did they make this decision? And then obviously finding and waiting for time from an expert. And so during this, I'm asking a lot of questions. And so, see that from here? Some of the questions that I'm asking is about our new serverless architecture. And so I'm wondering how are we thinking about this problem in this space of vector databases, and why did we design it this way? Why is this concept of namespaces so important today versus maybe 2 years ago? How does data flow for the write path? How does it flow for the query path? And a bunch of other questions too. Another use case here is eventually we need to evolve our architecture. And so again, we want to build out, whether it's a new feature or a new service, or we're integrating a third-party service, we need to be able to make decisions based on the current state, the current state of our systems. And if we just look at documentation, it's more than likely that they're out of date, whether that's architecture diagrams or requirements documents. It tends to get out of date very quickly because we don't maintain it. We're always trying to do the next thing, right? Yes. Okay. So during this process, like we're looking for patterns. We're trying to figure out like how did someone solve this problem in the past, whether that's within our company or that's in our industry. We want to make sure that we're being consistent with how we solve problems, because we want to. If we can be consistent, we can know that it is more likely to actually be successful. Again, more questions that we're asking. Like I said, how did our last project solve this problem? We need to add a recommendation engine. Where should we integrate it? Should we roll our own or should we use a third-party service? Other questions as well. And then the last use case here, there's probably more use cases, but like the last one that we kind of wanted to touch on is security analysis. And this could be, reviewing a checklist when we're integrating a new service, a third-party service. It could be working with the security team in order to have them evaluate whether what we built is good enough to put into production for our customers to use. And again, asking more questions. We might ask, like, after a breach, what happens? Like, what data was exposed? We might want to add, like I said, a third-party integration. We're going to evaluate probably that third-party product, the integration points, and what sort of vulnerabilities could exist there.
All right, so I'm going to come over here so I can control the slides. So we're going to talk a little about the state of AI and diagrams today, at least for the experience that I've had and what we're seeing. There's different aspects. There's the ability to actually generate diagrams. I put in some text and I wanted to get a diagram out. We'll see an example of that. The diagram to text description. That was actually our previous example, and we'll see another one of those as well. There's some analysis capabilities that you can actually ask a diagram, which is kind of interesting. After you get the diagram, get a description, you can start asking a lot of these questions that Jenna brought up in the previous slides. You can ask from that. And we're starting to see this integrated really well into IDEs and coding assistants and SaaS products and all over the place. So here's an example. Now, I've been an architect for a long time, and I feel pretty confident in my skills, but I'm not the strongest in networking. So usually networking is, traditionally it's been handled by somebody else, sometimes they get it. So here's a kind of an example of a network firewall subnets in an Amazon VPC. So if you see a diagram like this and you think, oh, I'm gonna try and get some analysis on it, the prompt that I actually just gave on this was describe the key components and services in this diagram, and it spit out that whole section there. And it brought up things about the firewall subnets, it brought a bunch of the routing tables, the fact that it's in one availability zone. And in the example where we actually did this in the lab, I asked a follow-up question like how I could prove the resiliency of this, and it actually told me, hey, I need multiple AZs, and it gave me a bunch of different options too. So when you're kind of attacking a problem where you're maybe not that deep and an expert, these tools work really well. And again, this was just a raw prompt going against the Claude language model with almost none of the kind of AI tools or behavior that would happen. Okay, what do we think about this diagram? Okay, like, does anyone think it's a good diagram? Okay, because it's ugly, right? And I think it's ugly because of a couple of reasons. One, I would never use the stick figure user. These icons are really old. The arrows aren't straight. But that is the result of that kind of raw user prompt just fed into Claude to get a dry-o formatted XML file. And notice it didn't create an image like a PNG style image, it created XML because the LLMs are really good at transforming text to text, and there's a lot of examples of dry-o on the internet. So to make that better and to see this image right here, which of course looks a little better, you can see we put a whole bunch of extra stuff at the top. And this is just a screenshot of a Jupyter notebook with Python. But you'll see from the callout errors that there's a more detailed system prompt. It includes a bunch of formatting rules, like the type of icons to use and what, how arrows should be. It actually injected into it 2 golden examples of your IO files I had that looked the way I wanted to them. And then in the end, it also included the user prompt. So it took all those things together, and it was able to actually output a better diagram. So this goes a lot to what I have in the title there, that the context of when you're asking it is really key, right? So having best practices or examples. Now, I work at AWS, so I use Amazon Q Developer and the Q IDE, and that's because I work there, but there's lots of tools out there at different levels, and they're all leapfrogging. So I'm usually just referencing examples of stuff that I have hands-on experience with, but it's not an ad, although there is a free tier, so you could use it for free. But one of the ways that I keep up with this is there's, I follow people on social media. Here's a couple of people on LinkedIn that do a lot with Q and diagrams. And even more interesting is there's sites like promptz.dev out there that have a lot of examples of prompts and the context rules and the stuff that you have that's going to make it better. So that's definitely one of the takeaways to check it out is learn from what's going on out there. So for a similar test, I pulled up my Q developer and I just did a Q chat, and I gave it that same user prompt, that simple one that produced the ugly diagram. And it produced this one on the left. Okay, also ugly. Maybe even uglier because the text is overlapping each other. Okay? So that was, also disappointing. But then what I did is I took that same system prompt and the same formatting rules and those same examples, and I threw them into a markdown file, and I put it in the specific folder that Q Developer uses. There's a rules directory, and I think a lot of the IDEs have kind of these rules or context folders. Threw that in there, ran the same query, and I got a much better result. And in fact, this one even has a region boundary in it, which we haven't seen before. So again, the difference, with the same prompt to getting a better diagram is adding that kind of additional context that relates to the stuff that I want. So, okay, who's heard of vibe coding? All right? Who thinks who gets like cringy when they hear vibe coding? Okay, so now I just do vibe architecting because it sounds cooler. But I was working with on a customer problem, and they were talking through the scenario, and I knew I was going to have to go in the console and try it out and do some things, right? So, so I could give them a good answer. So I said, what, I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to actually see if I can generate some CDK code to deploy it, and I wrote this prompt, and there might be even some grammar errors or some spelling in there if you look close enough. And it generated something and it deployed, and it was great 95% of the way, okay? With the one error, that there was a specific thing that was using the wrong kind of format structure of version 2 versus a version 1. One was configured in the code, the other was like configured in the config, and it didn't turn on error logging. So then I spent like a lot of time trying to debug why nothing would work. So I got super close, but then I felt like, it still didn't work. Now, with all the time I saved, I actually drew this nice diagram here by hand because this diagram doesn't represent everything that's in the prompt. For me, this diagram represented the key things that I wanted to talk to the customer and it was about the security groups and the security boundaries and how the data flow is kind of protected, defense, and depth between API gateway and there. So I kind of used the time to create still by hand a very specific diagram that I wanted with the aspects in place based on that code. So I think there's still, it's like I don't rely on AI to generate all my diagrams, but it does help. Now I bet you if I describe this, maybe I'll get something similar to that, or I could use this in training in my other context. So there's still things there.
So another question for all of you. How many of you have been using AI tools in your diagramming workflows today? Yes, okay, a few of you. And
Less than 10?
And how is it going? Is it working? Is it helpful or is it frustrating?
Thumbs down,
okay, thumbs up here,
up,
thumbs down.
up,
some
thumbs
of this,
up,
some of this.
wavy hand,
okay.
wavy hand,
About
wavy hand.
this.
Okay.
And one really strong thumbs up. Thank you, Isaac.
Well, Isaac's really good though.
Okay.
Which computers bend to his will.
Okay. So I think what we're hearing is it's not perfect, right? So there's some good things here and some not so great things here. We know that, like Kevin just said, like there was some stuff that like saved him time, but also it wasn't perfect. So he had to go and kind of do the next like 10, 20, 30% to get to perfect or near perfect. We expect consistent visual representation, and so if we can prompt the right way and use the right icons, we can get to that point. And we have basic analysis capabilities. But what we don't have is that we have like our model has a very limited understanding of what our company knows and works on and does, and the decisions that we've made to implement something a certain way. It doesn't know about patterns that we use. It might know about some industry standards, but it doesn't know about our standards and our rules. It still likely requires human validation, intervention, and it's not deeply integrated with any of our artifacts. Like some of those I mentioned, our Git commits, logs, anything like that. But this workflow is changing. We've gone from like hand-drawn paper-based diagrams. I think Kevin knows about that, right? I'm just kidding. Okay, to desktop tools.
As a child, I used crayons to draw cloud architectures, foreshadowing the cloud coming into existence.
We've gone like to desktop tools, cloud-based tools with the ability to collaborate in real time. And now we're moving towards collaborating in real time with AI. And so what we're starting to get at is that context is key to this situation in order to have more accurate analysis, more accurate diagrams, so that we can make decisions based off of what we're seeing, what we're analyzing. So if you remember back to that first exercise that we did where we showed the very simple diagram, asked Claude what that is. If you can imagine a much more complex diagram for a more complex system, we need to be able to answer questions about that. And if it's just us as humans wanting to answer questions, we don't just look at the diagram and figure out what it does. We go and talk to people. We go and look at our architectural decision records. We go potentially look at, maybe we're looking at Git commits and our system logs to see, what are the user patterns that are happening? Like how is the scaling in production? All that kind of stuff. And there's, if we want to bring in context now, there's kind of three different main ways that we can, well, there's probably more than that, but the three that we're going to talk about are kind of where this is going. So beyond our diagrams, we actually want to be able to bring in that data that we just talked about, that information, that context from our company. So that could be other diagrams. It could be source code. It could be commits. It could be in our infrastructure. It could be our decision documents, security policies, logging, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, look at this. Now, when I introduced myself, did I say I was egotistical? There was supposed to be a laugh there. So 2 years ago, when I spoke at Open Source North, I talked about architecture decision records and items, and I had found this InfoQ article. And one of the things that it called out at that point was in the future, language models are going to be forensic archaeologists going to be able to comb through ADRs and get history, right? This was the prediction from them. And for me, it's like the future is now, or at least it was last month for me. I was working on a code review with a peer. We were pushing some source code out to an open source repo. I had reviewed it, and then a bunch of changes came, and I was going to review those before we pushed it. And 100 files were changed. And it's like, I was spot checking them. I saw that, okay, we changed the copyright header in every file to match what the copyright of the project should be, and then we swapped out the logging library to a different logging library. And as you can manage, those two changes are pretty small, but they affected every file. So I decided to give, an LLM a try and say, hey, can you just review the changes since this git commit and just provide me a summary. If a bunch of files have the same change, just list those, and then also tell me the major changes. And it actually worked pretty well. So I was pretty impressed with myself, right? But now this week, or last week, I saw almost everybody's come out with like a GitHub pull request agent thing, which probably does this better. So that's the kind of the interesting thing on this problem is things are changing a lot, but you have to try stuff to realize, hey, that's kind of how it might work. So, I don't know, Jenna, why don't you talk about this very pretty picture on the screen?
This is a very pretty picture.
Look at that.
So another example here is being able to take a whiteboard diagram and have it analyzed by a model. And it doesn't matter like what this person's penmanship is. It might have been Kevin's. I'm actually not very sure. But what we can see here on the right is we've got Shakespeare, Gutenberg, and Alexandria. And those are 3 internal systems named after human beings. And our model probably only knows about the human beings, right? If we ask just the model, like analyze this diagram, it's not gonna give us anything super insightful. But if we are able to integrate into our own internal knowledge base of what these names mean and what these systems do, or in some cases, like maybe what some of our standards are or our best practices are, we can get something that is a little more accurate and insightful. And so
let's go back. I want to see if anyone can guess. Okay,
Yeah.
I know some of you have worked at a publishing company before. Who's got to guess what the Shakespeare system is? No guesses. It's the editorial system, because of course Shakespeare the Bard wrote a lot of things. Anyone have an idea what the Gutenberg system is? It is a publishing system. And then Alexandria, library system. Very good. So you would all be smarter than LLMs.
Okay.
All right.
Again, like sometimes we need to reach out. Like we need to, if we're going to ask an LLM a question, we need to reach out and Thank you. And get more information. Pull in that context that Kevin was talking about a few slides ago. So this is a diagram of the actual flow that I was just talking about of what happened. So it's a little bit more complicated. Here we are using tools to look up information from the internal systems. This could be a database. This could be a vector database like Pinecone for semantic search. We could also pull in information from an API, so to get real-time information and pull that in that maybe that model wasn't trained on.
I think the thing that I think about is if you've seen all the hype on MCP servers, Model Context Protocol, a lot of those things are a way to provide tools to the little 3-bubble chat box to be able to access this data. So we're seeing kind of an evolution. When we were playing with this a while ago, we basically said, here's a tool that can look up system names because we knew what it was. But now the LLMs are getting smarter and they can orchestrate, and you can just say, here's a bunch of tools, and they know how to go look up stuff on demand. So it provides that context in real time. I'm going to talk a little more about one of my favorite topics, diagrams as code. And there's a lot of benefits to it, including this call out that they might be generated from many sources. And this ThoughtWorks article just talked about, hey, you might write your own programs that would generate SVGs for diagrams as code. But what's interesting is I feel like one of those many sources now of generating these diagrams is generative AI. And an example of a diagrams as code language is Mermaid. It's out there on the internet, it's open source, so there's a lot of examples of it, which means that all the LLMs that are scraping content on the internet have found great examples and they know how to also create it. So if I took that whiteboard image and we turned it into that text description, and then as a follow-up prompt, I say, hey, convert this into a Mermaid formatted sequence diagram. And that's what it output, okay? So to me, the most amazing thing on this was there is a point when the display microservices talks to Alexandria, the library system, right? But I forgot to draw that arrow here. That arrow isn't here. So the LLM was able to kind of, based on the description, be able to kind of infer that wasn't on there. So I thought, wow, that was pretty insightful. And because this is diagrams as code, I can easily edit this text and update it and create a new diagram, add it to my project. So kind of an example of where actually generating diagrams does work out pretty well. The other interesting thing is that, when I had that example diagram that I drew that just had the trust boundaries, it was kind of an aspect of that diagram. And I can see in the future we have a lot more multi-perspective visualization where our different kind of stakeholders get different views of the same data, whether it's the diagram or it's analyzing the project and it's generating a diagram. I mentioned trust boundaries. There could be operational concerns. There could be the data storage. There could be the capabilities. There could be the user journeys. So this is a place where I see kind of AI helping with it a lot. I base this on stuff like the C4 model, which has been around now for over 10 years, 15 years. And it's a model-style language that lets you actually have kind of 4 different levels, from just the high context to containers, which just means a grouping, not an OCI container, to components down to code. And you can have a single kind of DSL language, like the structurizer DSL, and it can render it, and you can actually click through and do this. Kind of one example. There's actually, when I look on the internet, I see actually a bunch of other software startups and companies that have very similar style of diagrams where you can define it once and then kind of click through and interactively do it. But in some ways, you still have to kind of create those diagrams. But I'm seeing for those systems that actually have their model language or diagramming language open source and the specs defined, I'm seeing us, like AI, being able to scan your code base, generate these types of diagrams, get these visualizations, and then let you click through and kind of zoom in and out of it. Like I could just filter it on, show me the data flow, or visualize it a different way, or do the system boundaries, or click in which storage systems don't have encryption turned on, or which ones are using this custom key. So that is a way to kind of interrogate or evaluate your system. I think is like something I see coming up.
Another thing that we're seeing a lot more of, you've probably heard a lot more about this, is autonomous agents, agentic workflows. If you were at or sitting in on any of the Microsoft Build or Google I/O announcements last week, like their agent is like the big buzzword right now, right? And so we're starting to see, I see this in my job too, where agents are the things that people are kind of gravitating towards right now. And if you think of what this is, it's an autonomous agent, or an autonomous agent is something that can scale tasks, and they plan and operate independently, but they're going to pause for a human to actually intervene and provide more feedback, help make a decision. And we're seeing some of like I said, we're seeing some of this in the industry already. We're seeing this if you use Amazon Q Developer or Cursor or Windsurf. I think they all have, I know the first two for sure have agents that help you refactor a piece of code, where you give it a prompt and it goes and kind of does its work and then comes back to you and says, can I execute this tool? Can I change this code? Can I run this command at the command line? And you can either turn on a flag that, or a flag that says, yeah, execute everything, or you can intervene kind of as you want. So you have in these you have a little bit of control here. But what if you were able to build an agent that interacts with your own system? So all of these knowledge systems that we just talked about earlier, your decision records, your Git commit history, your architecture diagrams, your docs, your policies, the internet. Maybe there's something out there that that is more industry specific that or recent that you want to pull in as part of this process. And so again, it's usually kicked off by a human, whether that's a conversation or an action that happens. It iterates between the LLM and the environment, which is all of these potentially pieces of information, whether that's through tools or MCPs or whatever, to get that information. And then it alters the environment as well. So in our case, maybe it's generating a bunch of diagrams based off of our current infrastructure. Like I said, we're going to be seeing more and more of this. But this is kind of our last slide.
Except for the survey.
Well, except for the survey and questions. I'm going to go through this really quick because I do want to take questions if we can. We've talked a lot about how AI can kind of enable conversations with your architecture, with your internal systems. And I want to make sure that you have some sort of practical takeaways here. I think like the biggest one, the biggest two are like at the bottom, like try things out, push past the hype. But kind of some of the bigger ones, we want to make sure, you should really make sure you know where your data is and what state it's in, know what's good for your system, what's good for your architecture diagrams, what's good for the analysis that you need. You might not need 100% perfect every time you do it. So 90% of the way there, that might be good enough for what you're trying to do. Again, know what you're trying to accomplish, know your tools, know how to use your tools, and know when not to use your tools. I think like be very practical about it. Not everything needs a tool. Anything else?
No, just like I said, trying stuff. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I surprise myself both ways.
Okay, we have like 4 seconds, but I'm gonna just go over anyways. If there are any questions?
Okay, take a
Happy to
picture,
answer.
3 questions on this survey. You just
Yes, and
answer
take the
5
survey.
stars, 5 stars. Kev is the funniest if you need help.
Question.
So back in the day, a fun exercise for natural language processing was to take it, translate it to a different language, and then translate it back.
Yeah.
Have you done any playing with, I had the really good diagram, I made the other diagram, and then I converted it back?
I have not
And how
tried
has it
that.
performed?
Yeah.
I don't know that I've tried that in detail.
Yeah, I haven't tried that either. I do like one of your examples with like going from
Yeah.
diagram to text to sequence diagram is a little like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, we
It's just
generated the diagram
a
that
different
we
stage.
analyzed, we generated, but I don't know that I used the same prompt in it. I used a simpler version. So,
Also, if I do it over time, does the diagram
oh,
change? Is also a variation of that same sort of.
do you have something?
Yeah, a quick question. So I love using the LLMs for generating diagrams. And Mermaid is definitely the easiest way to do it. Have you done any thoughts about if your model can understand your endpoints and what it talks to? Could it generate open API specs or Swagger docs for you, knowing what you need to handle in your microservice?
It probably could. This is where I feel like the tool ecosystem and the MCP is really going to help. Because you could, in that case, you just tell your model, I've got a tool that knows how to look up open API specs or validate them. And then the LLMs get really good at orchestrating the calls between them, especially with these agent frameworks. I think last week, at least 4 main new agent frameworks were open sourced. I think one from OpenAI, one from Amazon, probably another one from Google, and who knows which other one. So,
Anthropic maybe.
yeah, maybe, yeah. So I think that's a lot of like the playing around. Like, where is it supposed to work? What's the context? Where do I need to get it? You're close.
This might be subjective, but is there a way to get pretty diagrams out of Mermaid that aren't just so dry?
No. Well, I can make them a little colorful, but you know, Mermaid has got a new architecture diagram format that's in beta, but it's still a little flaky. I played with it in December and wrote some issues on it, but they don't have the same type of image styling that like Plant UML does, and I've done a lot of Plant UML, but still, it gets hard. That's why I'll use Dry.O, but that gets kind of ugly too. So I don't think it's perfect. Okay.
I think last one.
All right, last question, and then
so
we clap.
You're in AWS.
Why?
Access to Jenna Cloud. So like, when diagram of what your subnets look like, and
Oh.
your PCs, and all that stuff. Like, I've already built the infrastructure there,
Okay.
so.
There's actually already in CloudFormation, there's something called Application Composer. There's a way to do some diagrams there. Also on AWS Labs, there's a whole MCP tools that even lets you do cost analysis. So let's connect, because there's a bunch of stuff that's out there. And honestly, it's even hard for me to keep up with all the things that are happening. Like, I feel like before I started a session, I should have checked social media and figured out which slides were wrong, because things had already changed today.
Yes.
All right, we're probably past our time.
Yeah.
The next person needs to come in. We don't want to disappoint them, but they get here and then 100 people leave and then they feel bad about
Yes.
themselves. So,
Thank you.
all right, thank you.